It's a pleasure to be here. I think I'll try to plunge right into this. Does this work?
Yes.
Yes? Okay, fantastic. So,
You probably have maybe a click on the presentation.
first, I need to just make sure that, all right, this works. Okay, fantastic. Today, more than 280 million people, or estimated 3.6% of the world's population, live in countries in which they were not born. This may not look that much in a world of over 8 billion people, but if you put all of these people together, they're going to form the fourth largest, most populous country in the world, right after the United States. Where they go, how they choose their host countries, it's not random. In fact, it's quite predictable how people move. They move to places that are geographically nearby. They move to places that are richer than their home country. They move to places that are culturally similar to them, so that share the same language or a similar language. They also move to places that are historically connected, especially colonial ties play a big role. So if you run a gravity model, which I think many of you have done on different things, trade, in this case, migration. In this case, the gravity model has the MOD, has the bilateral migration stuff between country of origin O and country of destination D. So if we try to explain these bilateral migration stops across all the countries in the world as a function of pretty mundane characteristics, the population size of the countries, the geographic distance, the wealth as measured by GDP per capita, language similarity, common colonizer or colonial dependency, whether they share this, a common border, the land size and time and country of origin fixed effects. You're going to get models that fit the data pretty well. So this is for all migrants. These few variables explain over 70% of the variance in the bilateral migration stocks. If you divide migrants by tertiary and non-tertiary, the fit is even better. Yeah, but there is a residual. So what's in this residual? In this residual, there are other things too, admittedly, but there are lots of reasons, lots of factors that contribute to migrants to recognize certain host countries as more attractive than others. We're going to call this openness to migration. So this has to do with visa regimes, or more generally, migration policy, the implementation of this policy, but also it's more complicated. It's labor market regulations. Is your diploma recognized in another country, right? Can you open a business in a foreign country? Can you invest in a foreign country? Can you buy property in a foreign country? There are also cultural factors. Some countries just have more open culture towards other ethnicities, other nations. There are attempts at measuring part of these, especially this is kind of easily measurable, but these factors are quite complex. So let me show you what's in this residual. If from the gravity model, I'm going to take one example, Finland. If you look at the 2020 census of Finland and count which nationalities were present in Finland that year, you will count that Finland had people from 68 different nationalities. I have to set a threshold. The threshold is pretty lax, is 1 per million population. So Finland has about 5.6 million there. So 5 or 6 people need to be in Finland for that nationality to count. But it's quite a bit, right? It's 68 nationalities. In this sample, I have 148 nationalities. So 68 out of 148 is quite a bit. But if I clean up this number from the fact that some of these nationalities are geographically nearby. They have economic dependency, they have historic dependency, and so on. So if I only look at the residual of the gravity model, it will turn out that Finland is, let's call it, truly open to only 6. And these are, if you're curious, these are Estonia, USA, Canada, Iraq, Somalia, and Thailand. So what this residual tells us is that Finland is open more than expected to some countries. So the groups that you expect, the size of the groups that the model, the gravity model would predict is smaller than the actual size of the groups from these 6 countries. Now, if we compare Finland with Denmark, a very similar country, right? They're both Nordic countries. They have very similar population size, very similar wealth. Denmark has more nationalities present, but the residual is also much larger. So it's open to, it has kind of, let's say, a revealed preference for 38 different countries. Here is Norway. It's somewhere between Finland and Denmark on this measure. Whereas Austria, it's open to 17 countries, similar to Norway, let's say, and compared to other similarly sized and regionally not so different countries, it's more close. So it's more close than this is Switzerland, and this is Sweden, a country of similar population. So Sweden and Switzerland are more open than Austria, according to this measure. Now, if we map, instead of just these few examples on this, if I show you the results for all 148 countries, it looks like this. So let me explain what's in this graph. What we see here is 148 countries clustered in 14 different regions. And they're kind of sorted by their average openness, from most open to least open. And in each kind of square, you see the dynamics of openness over time from between 2000, 2010, and 2020. Zero openness would mean that a country shows no revealed preference for any other nation. So it may have factually people from other nations, but not more than expected. Yeah, it doesn't mean that whichever country is here doesn't have any people from other nations, but they're not larger. Their group is not larger than expected. And 65 would mean that you're open to 65. This does not always work, but okay, 65, it would mean that you're open to 65 different countries. There are 2 things to take away from this plot. First, that most of the world is not very open to immigration. There are 4 regions, however, they're quite open. First is the Gulf states, the Nordic states and Western Europe. You can also think of them as one region, and the Western offshoot. So these are Canada, US, Australia, and New Zealand. And these 4 regions have been also opening in this period where we can measure it. And among them, especially European countries have increased their openness by a great deal. Actually, if you make a ranking of all countries, the top 10 tend to be European countries. So let me give you a sense of what it means. We have a really nice visualization that I would encourage you to check out. But I'm looking at this little metric here. So the United Kingdom in 2020 was open to 33 different places. Within 20 years, it added 29 different nationalities in a size that's larger than expected, given its characteristics. Italy added...
Just one question about yes. United Kingdom. In this, more than expected,
yes.
Is like Brexit expected? Because I would expect it to become less attractive. So if the Brexit is inside the expectation or outside?
So it's really interesting that you're asking that. So this is 2010. You see how it was on a very upward curve. And somewhere here, Brexit happened, right? Midway. So it slowed down, but it didn't, right?
Yeah.
It's going up. So it's actually
Migration numbers have been going up. So
migration numbers have been going up. And not just migration numbers, but the diversity of migration. So what I'm looking at here, so both is going up. So Brexit, it's a very interesting case. And this is why we say there is de jure openness, yeah, which is migration policy, which has become more restrictive in the UK. And there is de facto openness, which is what we say we measure, which is how, in which direction are you really going? Like, what's the revealed size of and openness of your country? And we find in the case of the UK that de facto UK maybe slowed down its openness, but it still became more open since Brexit than before Brexit. Even though migration policy, this de jure policy, was becoming stricter and stricter since Brexit. Yeah.
Thank you.
But as the Brits, they know better. All right. Yes. So you can see also here, this is more like a factual situation. So this is not a measure from us, but this is what actually happened. So UK had 12% foreign born in 2010. By 2020, it was 14%. Yeah. So and what is more interesting, migration policy was supposed to make it harder for less educated to come to the UK, and it was supposed to attract more skills to the UK. But in fact, when you see what happened in relative terms, we have decline in the share of highly skilled migrants between 2010 and 2020. So it tells you something about the effectiveness of policy. Okay. Italy, from 18 to 45, 27 new nationalities. Spain, 25 new nationalities in 20 years. Germany, 20 new nationalities. Sweden, also 20 new nationalities. So this is something like to think about. Frankly, I study migration, but once I started looking at the diversity of migration, I was surprised, very surprised to see the scale of opening. Yeah. Okay. Now, immigration is economically desirable. Europe is an aging society. If you look at study after study by the IMF, by the World Bank, maybe WIFO is doing something similar, will show you that we are not very good at increasing birth rates. So if you want to sustain the fiscal health of the economy, if you want to have enough working age people to sustain the older people, but also to provide childcare for people like me, we need immigration. And there are many benefits to immigration. There are many studies that show that high skilled immigration causes innovation and economic growth. However, for all of this to work, you really need migrants to be economically integrated into a society, right? And this is a serious thing, because if you have immigration without integration, you get into a very dangerous place. So we have studies that show that immigration can lead to lower preferences for distribution, so less solidarity among people, far-right voting. We have increasing evidence from Austria, from Greece, from Sweden, residential segregation, very good studies from the Nordic countries and the Netherlands. So how well are we doing? How well are EU countries and European countries? I have EU plus a couple. How well are we doing on integration? So one way to measure integration is to look at the gaps between the foreign-born population. So economic performance gaps between the foreign-born population and let's call them domestic-born population. These are raw gaps. So I don't have statistical twins here yet, not yet. So I am just looking at the gap in the average participation of the foreign-born in a country population and the domestically born population. And in the case of participation, if it's positive, if it's blue, it means that the foreign-born is participating more. But it tends to be red or somewhere here, which means that the domestic prime age individuals are participating more. Unemployment tends to be higher among the foreign-born, and vertical mismatch is defined only for the tertiary educated. And this means that vertical mismatch, you have a vertical mismatch when you have a tertiary degree, but you work in an occupation that does not require a tertiary degree. So this is specific to people like us who work in jobs not like us. I suppose you will work in your area of qualification. Okay, so I guess the most extreme case here is Sweden, which has lower participation among the foreigners, higher unemployment rates, and relatively high vertical mismatch. Great Britain, on the other hand, has higher participation among foreigners, hardly any unemployment gap, and relatively small vertical mismatch. I don't want to make a judgment. These are just rough gaps. We're going to now clean them up and see what explains them, okay? So one very important aspect is to understand the characteristics of the immigrants. Immigrants come in all colors, as you can see. Some countries have long-standing diasporas, long-standing immigrant communities. Others have recent ones, like Romania and Malta. Some have very well-educated migrants. Others have not so well-educated migrants. In countries like Luxembourg and Cyprus, migrants tend to come for employment. In countries like Slovakia, Portugal, Sweden, they come because of family migration primarily. Then we have several countries like Sweden, like Denmark, like Germany, but also Austria, where we have a lot of refugees, right? So it's very important to understand these differences. Also, we have heterogeneity by the region of origin of the migrants. Some have mainly, migrants from the neighboring countries, which are very similar to them. Others have migrants that are culturally very different. So we're going to think of the gaps as influenced by three broad types of factors. One set of factors is related to what I talked about first, is the scale, the speed, and the scale, and the scale, speed, and diversity of immigration. Second set of factor is related to characteristics of the immigrants, some of which I showed you, and other factors are related to what host countries are doing. In the data that we have, we will be able to study best this middle, but we will have kind of a rough way to estimate the potential influence of the first and the third influence. Okay, the data comes from the EU labor force surveys between 2008 and 2022. In all the estimates that I will show you, we're going to work with prime age workers. We're talking about economic integration, and these are the people that should be working, not static, not retired. I think in the most interesting estimates, we will go down to 22, maybe 21 countries, because UK stopped sharing data past 2019. And all of the estimates that I show you, before we run any regressions, and before we do further comparisons, we're going to conduct entropy matching. So entropy matching is a method developed by Jens Heinmüller, where you take the population of let's call it a treated group, and you create weights for the other group, let's call it the control group, such that the control group mimics the characteristics of the treated group. In our case, we will have the foreigners that will have their own characteristics, age, gender, education, and so on. And we're going to create weights for the domestically born population, such that when we use these weights, this population then mimics the distribution of the foreign population, so that we kind of, in the end, compare more apples and apples and not two very unbalanced populations. Okay. So once we have done all this, using this, after having created the weights, we will run regressions, and the regressions will have these three outcomes that I already introduced: labor market participation, unemployment, and vertical mismatch. We will run the regressions for 5 different kinds of migrants. Migrants that came to the country because they found employment. So before coming to the country, they found employment, and they came to the country because they found employment. This is kind of our sanity check group as well, yeah? Because there the gap should be 0. If you came for employment, you should be employed, and you're probably employed in your level of qualification too. People that came because because they hope to find employment, so they first came to a country to search for employment. So that's employment after. Then we have people that came for family, people that came for education, and people that came as refugee and asylum seeker. The most important variable of interest is this reason for migration. So instead of looking at foreign-born, native-born, we look at foreign-born that came for employment, foreign-born that came as refugee, foreign-born that came. This limits the heterogeneity among the foreign-born, yeah? Then we want to know whether this, being foreign-born, whether this gap is different for men and women. So this interaction effect will give us the effect for women. And we also want to know for foreign women, and we also know whether the effect differs by level of education. So in the end, I will show you results for 3 groups: low-educated foreign men, low-educated foreign women, and then the average effect for men and women by level of education. So we will have upper secondary, short tertiary, and tertiary. And then all of these 3 groups of effects we will be able to see also the heterogeneity by reason for migrating. Okay, now this is our preferred specification and should allow us to look at this heterogeneity of gaps. However, it has limitations. The limitation is that this information about the reason for migration is only available in 2021 and not for all countries. So it doesn't allow us to study the effect of these changes over time, like the scale and the diversity of migration. So as a compromise, we also run, by the way, I should also say, in addition to these 3 groups of effects, we're also interested in the effect of years of residence. So the longer you stay in a country, the longer you get the time to integrate, right? And also, it also matters which region you're coming from. So that's also kind of interest. Now, having said that, I said we're going to have to do a compromise, and we will now run the kind of the same specification, but instead of reason for migration, we're going to look at the region of origin of the migrant. And we have 8 different regions of origin: EU or EFTA, kind of other Europe, which is the periphery, more or less the periphery of Europe. This is Middle East and North Africa, other Africa, North America and Oceania, Latin America, East Asia, and South Asia. So we're going to look at the heterogeneity of this. Good. So,
Sorry, to understand,
yeah,
how do you estimate these variables vis-a-vis the control group? In the sense, how do I know the number of years? Like,
Yeah, so if you are born if you're born in the country, it's like your age. So it's kind of the same as your age. Yeah. So partially, but not to the extent that we have multicollinearity. These two are correlated. Yeah, for part of the population. Yes. It has host country fixed effect, not individual fixed effect.
Especially for
No.
is not.
So that's why I asked.
No. We cannot track people over time. So yeah, so there is country destination fixed effects, time fixed effects, and country times time fixed effects. Yeah. Okay. So what we find is there is a lot to unpack here. So bear with me. The left panel are the results for participation, and the right panel are the results for unemployment. And this is the results by region of origin. So first order effect is that, so here you see the coefficients for from up to down for low educated men, low educated women, and then by level of education. I said this is the average effect for men and women by level of education. The first thing that's important to emphasize here is that the most important effect is the level of education. And maybe not the way we expected, or at least not the way I expected, because it is the upper secondary that participate most. For everyone else, the gap is rather small. Yeah, the low educated men, the short tertiary, and the bachelor, the gap is small. And the second order effect is women. No matter which region they're from, they participate less. So I think this is well known. It wasn't that well known that is not very dependent on the region. There's also a role for the region. So to use some women that come from places where domestically the labor participation of women is low, like the blue is South Asia, the orange is the Middle East and North Africa, also have lower participation. But the more important in magnitude effect is just being a woman. And then conditional on participation, again, upper secondary, the upper secondary have lower unemployment than the domestic born, which to me suggests that we have strong demand effect. So across the Europe, on average, there is strong demand for people with upper secondary education, and hence they participate in larger numbers. And when they participate, they also have better employment outcomes than the domestic born. Good. For women, the unemployment is sometimes greater. It's again, this is significant for the women that come from regions where women participation is low. Again, the effect is South Asia and Middle East and North Africa. Now, to give you just a sense, because we have more than one thing we're interested in, if I look at participation, the most important effect is education. So this is decomposition of the explained variance of the model. And you see here, the most important effects do not have to do with being foreign, but they have to do with level of education, women, and then country time years fixed effects. And then country fixed effects. And only then you come to factors that have to do with being foreign. However, when it comes to unemployment, now the fact that you're foreign starts becoming more important. So a region of origin, being women from specific regions, region times education, that's not very significant, but these two start playing a role. Also years of residence, 9% of the variance, then region of origin, 8% of the variance. So together they start kind of like the characteristics of the migrants start playing a role. Again, however, what's more important is country times year fixed effects, education, and then country fixed effects. Let me show you by reason for the results by reason for migration. So I said that if you came to a country because you found an employment, you should not have a gap, right? Or it shouldn't work against this group. So we find that if you come for employment, either before or because you were seeking employment, then participation levels are higher than the domestic statistical twin, let's call it. Yeah. And conditional on participation, also your unemployment levels are lower. So these people are there and they actually are kind of better, more active and more employed conditional on participation than the domestic population. So they serve an important economic role. If you're a family migrant, you're less likely to participate. Conditional on participation, if you're low skilled, you're also less likely to be employed. That's the blue dot. Where are the refugees? If you're a low educated refugee, man or a woman, you're less likely to participate. So they're somewhere in between. They're not worse than the family migrants, which was, it required some thinking for me why this is so. But they're somewhere between the family migrants and the economic migrants. And once we condition on participation, refugees actually have no gaps. They, are able to find jobs as well as the domestic-born people. So the constraints here on refugees, and I like that Ola Ali will tell us more, is really on this participation. So what is holding off the better participation of the refugees? Good. So from this analysis, what we find is, I'm going to focus on the unemployment because that's kind of like where the interesting things are. So I said that we're unable to look at country time fixed effects, which capture this change in diversity and scale, because this is one snapshot, it's 2021. But aside from that, we find that the country fixed effect is quite large, right? It's 28% of the explained variance. And then jointly, region of origin, reason for immigration, years of residence, which are all related to being a migrant, are also very important. So together, they're over 30% of the explained variance. So what I take away from here is that migrants' characteristics really matter when it comes to, so who you host really matters for how well your migrants are integrated, especially the region of origin, the reason for migration, their educational background, the years spent residing in the country. However, equally important, and sometimes maybe even more important, are factors specific to the host country, in terms of how much variance is explained. And also this time variant host country effects. And these include this change in the scale and diversity of immigration, not only, but also that is part of them. How much time do I have left? 10 minutes. Okay, good. All right. You might be curious about the tertiary educated. So people like us, they don't have gap in terms of participation and probability of unemployment. They don't have a gap. But when they work, do they work in the qualification that they're supposed to work? And what we find is that if you come for, because you found employment, so the upper red dots, then you don't have a gap, man or a woman. But if you come for any other reason, you come and then you search for employment, you come for family reasons, you come as a refugee, you actually have substantial gaps. So to give you a sense, the yellow dots, so if you come and look for employment, you're 40% more likely to be mismatched, which is substantial. And it's really interesting that, so I put these two on the same scale to give you a sense that the reason for migrating is much more important than where you're coming from. Yeah. So these coefficients are much more stick together than than those by reason for migrating. Okay, now we can turn the question around and we can say, so if I control for the migrants' characteristics, which countries, what remains of the gaps? Yeah. So what remains to be accounted for how a country is doing on in terms of integrating their migrants. I rank this by unemployment, and now we find that some countries like Finland, they have a large unemployment gap, and they also have relatively high vertical mismatch gap. Estonia, Denmark, Belgium, where is Austria? Austria is here. It has some unemployment gap. It has very large vertical mismatch gap. So controlling for the characteristics of the migrants, the tertiary educated migrants are not very well matched in Austria. It would be very interesting to know and to study more why this is the case. We have some hypotheses. Okay, so what do we take away? Europe's opening to immigration has been remarkable in the last 20-25 years, both in terms of scale and diversity. The upper bound estimate is that 30% of the variance that we can explain with the models in the foreign native gaps can be attributed to factors such as the increase in the scale and diversity of immigration. I say this is upper bound because there are other things like economic changes over time that are packed into it. Then another 18 to 31%, depending on which model you take, of the gap can be attributed to the migrants' characteristics. And then another 17 to 80 to 28% of the gap can be attributed to the host country characteristics. So this is where the host country can do active integration policies to improve this. Right, a vertical mismatch we find to be ubiquitous among the tertiary educated in most European countries. And before I stop talking, I want to mention two policy challenges where I think since we find very strong host country fixed effects, one thing that has been a great challenge is that for integration has been the fact that migration policy is national issue. That's why I have the Austrian flag here, but it's also a supranational issue. So we stick to conventions. These conventions are applied on all of EU. So as a country, you often don't have that much say on the level and the diversity of migration. But if you're Vienna, you have almost no say. However, when it comes to integration, it's not Austria that integrates, it's not the EU that integrates, it's Vienna that integrates. So this is a very difficult issue. Municipalities are kind of like takers of immigrants, but they're given very hard job to integrate. And we can have a conversation just on this issue. I just want to put it out there that it's really important to think about smart ways of coordinating national and municipal integration policies. And the second one is that with this increasing foreign share of foreign-born citizens that across the EU, the question of voting comes up. So I'm a German citizen. I've been living here for 4 years. I want to vote here. I don't want to vote in Germany, but I can't. It becomes absurd in Vienna. If you're not from Vienna, you may not know this, so I'll expose it. Over 35% of Vienna's voting age individuals are ineligible to vote in state and national elections. Vienna is a state, so you cannot really have, you cannot determine anything, your vote. You have no vote for what's happening in Vienna. Over 60% of the working residents in Vienna cannot vote. And, you know, if you're an immigrant that's trying to integrate and because they are, most of them are they're overrepresented among the working residents, then good luck to you. So that's the other policy issue. And with that, I'd like to thank the research team. And we have on the first part of what I showed, these are all amazing guys that are at the Growth Lab at Harvard University. And we have a manuscript for the first paper that's publicly available. We also have a data visualization for the first part. And this is who paid for the research. You can look at the references if Dima shares the presentation. So thank you.
We have some time for questions. So, do we have any questions?
Yeah, actually, I want to, so actually, first of all, thanks for a very good presentation. So I want to know that, is there also any emphasis on reducing the extent of reverse migration, especially for the tertiary educated, because these are highly mobile individuals and they bring a lot of expertise and knowledge and contribution to tax. But if they move away to another location, is there also a like policy which is linked to the immigration policy, but on reducing this kind of flow of the tertiary workers?
Yeah. So what you have is what you have in mind. This would be people that are educated, for instance, here, but move away to another country, or educated that have come here and then move away.
Yeah.
So this is not specifically about that kind of, but I think it would be really interesting to find out in places where there is very high vertical mismatch, where tertiary educated cannot really make use of their skills, whether they're also more likely to then move on elsewhere, right? So there are countries, I didn't have time to show you more examples, but for instance, Great Britain and Switzerland are far better at utilizing the skills of the tertiary educated. So they have far smaller vertical mismatch. But in countries, especially countries that have certain language specificities, are not very open to English-speaking workplaces where you don't have companies where or environments where you can work in English. Those countries really underutilize the tertiary educated foreign population. Yeah.
Questions? Thank you very much for your presentation. I had a question in terms of, it has to do with citizenship, but also in terms of the length of stay. Do you see any, I don't know, trend that the differences decline with the time that this person has spent? Or is there also difference, and I don't know if that's in the data, with acquiring citizenship maybe?
Yeah. So length of the stay is extremely important. I think in one estimate, it was about like 10% of the variance was due to length of stay. So very, very important, especially for unemployment. So for the participation, it was interesting. It's not that important. So people like either participate or don't participate, but with job finding, conditional on participating, the longer you are in a place, the higher the probability that you find a job increases over time. So that's very important. With citizenship, we did not look at that. We could. There are excellent studies that are far more specific and detailed and have econometric identification. And if I'm not mistaken, they do find strong effect of citizenship. In Austria, less than 1% of the foreign population has citizenship. So it's kind of like not very interesting to study. But in other places where acquiring citizenship is easier, it does have an effect for integration, yes.
Thank you. Any more questions?
So thank you. I mean, this is fascinating. Just some comments for reflection. two things. First, have you tried to play a bit with the push factors, in the sense looking at like changes in the countries of origin, like shocks or wars? So looking more of like a forced migration, in the sense, okay, something happens and then I'm forced to migrate, rather than I am attracted by particular conditions like in the host economy. So I think that might be something interesting. And also I was wondering if, like, looking at the EU, because you are using the Labour Force Survey, if there is anything interesting to be done comparing intra-EU migration vis-a-vis extra-EU, with different regimes in terms of like working rights, for example, of mutual recognitions of qualifications, and seeing, okay, because intra-EU, basically, like I can go and work wherever I want within the EU, but if I come from outside the EU, then things are different. So also, and maybe also the enlargement, so where you can observe changes. So like, for example, UK citizens that have seen you more than like EU citizens living in the UK, the other way around, because you don't, they are not in the Labour Force Survey anymore, so you lose the post-Brexit. But I'm thinking about the UK citizens living in Europe. No, before they were EU citizens, then they are not anymore. And so, like, what happens in terms of, so their rights change in terms of access. You need to have a right to work, etc. So playing with these like changes in terms of the institutional framework, maybe there can be something interesting. Another dimension might be border countries, and although the Labour Force Service Treaty on how it is stratified, but also border regions that are more exposed to like different types of migration, including like Italy, for so the Mediterranean countries, and border, and also the regions bordering Ukraine. So playing around with this heterogeneity to try and unpack a little bit more of the effects of this de facto openness that I think is very interesting vis-a-vis the de jure that you were mentioning in terms of the status.
Yeah, this is extremely important, and this is kind of the next step. This is when I showed the results to Frank, my husband. He said, I said, yeah, we've been working on this for 2 years, and he said, so you're at the stage of exploratory data analysis. Yes, so the next thing is that we're thinking of. Sadly, one thing we're thinking about is how to use this repeated shocks to kind of get more to identification strategy and to get more clean effects. But also, I think it's just important as a description itself to understand what it means to, arrive jointly in Vienna. So when the Ukrainians arrived, they didn't arrive one by one. There were 45,000 of them arriving in 1 year. So that's a very different immigration that, you have you're one out of the 1,000 Ukrainians that arrive in a year. So so that's next. We are applying for a new wave of the LFS. So we're going to have a second year where we're able to study for migration, and that will give us a little bit of temporal, and we'll also will include the Ukrainians, and we'll include more of these waves of forced migration. So we will be able to do more. But yeah, this is like a very justified and point, and something we should do much more of. We can already see the differences between being EU EFTA and not being EU. And short answer to that: if you are coming from Great Britain, or if you are within EU, the migration is already so optimized that you don't have a gap. So the gaps really come from people that come for family reasons, people that come as refugees, and a few other a few other things. But I think like this speaks to the success of the labor market integration, that people are able to integrate so well that they're almost unrecognizable from the labor market of the native population.
Okay, very quickly, because we have to go here. As far as I understood, you do this entropy matching to make a native twin for the immigrant. Do you control there whether the native twin actually does have a migration background?
No.
Because maybe maybe you're underestimating actually something.
Could well be. We have no way with the data we currently have to see whether we know if you were born, but if you're a second generation migrant, you count towards being domestically born. Although I just heard a very interesting analysis for Austria that second generation migrants sometimes do worse than the first generation migrants.
Exactly. Okay.
And oddity among countries. Yes.
I'm afraid that we have to wrap it up. Thank you so much for the very interesting presentation.